1. This happened about a month ago. I was hiking and camping with my friends. There were 7 of us in total, excluding my instructor, as a practice hike for our Duke of Edinburgh Silver Certificate, known as the Hong Kong Award for Young People in Hong Kong. And yes, I live in Hong Kong. And on our second day of our trip, we had to traverse through very dense forest during a part of our walk. We triple-checked our 2 maps to ensure we were going on the right trail. So we continued to dive into the dense forest, guided by the bare minimum of what seemed to be a path. We carried on, took a small break, and continued down the hill where the map showed us. The path seemed to be very challenging, but nevertheless we thought nothing of it, because the many trails we have hiked on from the previous months, and to me over the years, had inconsistent levels of trail difficulties anyways. We were traveling down with determination, whilst clinging on to any form of support around, such as trees, our own trekking poles, etc., in order to safely traverse downwards. We finally reached a crest, the flat middle parts, where there was an artificial channel, and that was the moment where we knew something was not right. My buddy at the front said that it didn't seem to be the right place, even though all of us were very capable of using a map and compass. He said that the path shouldn't go down this rapidly because it felt like a 70 or 80-degree incline or something for the past 40 meters or so, and that we shouldn't be able to see the channel until we've climbed over another hill or something. Couldn't remember all the exact details. Finally, our instructor decided to cut in and checked for himself. He was also a tad confused as where we were, and argued that the map my buddy was holding was outdated. We dismissed this because we marked down where to go before the trip on the map, and that we would closely examine the map's paths for any discrepancies before setting foot on the actual place. In addition, every single Hong Konger should know the myth of the Sai Kung Barrier, surrounding the dense hilly areas of Sai Kung. That area was believed to be some sort of gateway, border, portal, or whatever, to a parallel universe, or more acceptably, a spirit world. It's like a mini Bermuda Triangle, though the exact borders of it is not known, but it should be somewhere on the vast Sai Kung Mountains. A few hikers went missing or vanished into thin air in the barrier, and the first reported incident of a person vanishing without a trace was in 2005. The incident is as follows. An off-duty police officer got lost while hiking and dialed 999 for help. When asked to give his name and coordinates, as Hong Kong trails were numbered with signs along it to help hitchhikers locate themselves, to the dispatcher, he gave out numbers that could not be located by the dispatcher using the government registry. Suspiciously, the recording seems to show that he was running away from someone or something in a very panicked tone whilst calling for help. To this very day, he remained missing, despite 10 days of relentless searching after the incident, and the years of searching after it happened. Back to my story. We were doubting on whether or not we have actually stumbled into the barrier, but I still saw some markings left by previous hikers that were basically everywhere along the paths we traversed on. We tried to go back the way we came. However, the path looked unfamiliar to us, as if we never went to the path. As a hiker, if you try to go back the way you came, you should be able to recognize some distinctive features of the path. But in our case, we were almost stuck on a place that was barely a path, and not even close to the level of bare minimum of a path, like I mentioned. We never even went to a path like that while we were climbing down, I swear on my life. We stuck close to each other, and we were incredibly sure it was the main path we came from. No intersections or stuff like that. After some complications, we managed to get out of that place, and we ended up at a place with large rocks to stop for lunch. I looked back and saw the previous place where we had a break about 1.5 kilometers away, but we can't seem to link up the path we went to the border we might have stumbled into. 2. This might have been the most surreal experience of my life, certainly up until this point, and most likely for decades to come. This week my school robotics team and I went out of town for a competition. It was at one of the oddest venues our team had ever visited. This building was a huge brick that took up the whole block, modern and ugly and square. Getting inside of the building required going through metal detectors and passing security guards. That part didn't seem too unusual, as this was a pretty large event in the United States, and those sort of things are generally going to have some amount of entry security. What was really weird was the interior. The first floor was where the competition was being held. It was somehow circular, despite the fact that the outside was decidedly flat. There was a hallway on the outside that wrapped all the way around, and then 2 massive rooms on the interior, with some weirdly placed open walls in the back next to some marked exit doors. None of us could figure out whether or not we were allowed on the second floor. The whole level was scattered with small groups of teenagers from various teams, sitting in corners and whispering conversations. Some were playing video games, all fairly standard, and none of the staff really seemed to care, except that there were some places fairly easily wandered into by the curious visitor, that we got the distinct sense that we were not supposed to see. When the competition ended, our teacher informed us that we had half an hour until the bus arrived, and presented us with a challenge. He had heard that somewhere on the second level was an access point to the roof, and he wanted us to split into groups to see who could discover the passage first. The floor itself was labyrinthine in layout, with hallways that had only 2 doors leading to other narrower hallways. Doors marked exit that led into expensive central rooms, and all manner of strange occurrences which I will address later on in this story. My friend and I paired off, and I led her through to a massive storage room that I had been in before, sure that it was somehow the key to finding the roof, and thinking it would be a shortcut. We dashed through a series of hallways and large, empty rooms with walls covered in unmarked doors until we encountered a staircase. Apparently the only such staircase anyone had discovered, that went upwards to an unknown destination. We followed the stairs up to a 3rd floor, muttering to each other on the way about how this 3rd story was not marked on any of the maps or fire exits on the walls of the building. When we opened the door at the top of the stairwell, we were spat out in a narrow white hallway covered with doors marked "Conference Room Restricted." The room was silent. Dead silent. The most silence I have ever known. Terrified that we would walk through the wrong door and be discovered by strangers in suits, turned in and suspended, my friend and I speed-walked to the end of the hall and were relieved to pull open a door that led to a room with a balcony. The balcony was locked. We turned around to try to leave, but the door had locked behind us. After trying every other door in the room, we came across one that remained entirely unmarked. It led to another stairwell, this one going down. We went down the stairs, eager to escape whatever mysterious secret we had stumbled across. When we opened the door to the 2nd floor, we saw a second room identical to the room we had just entered. Unnerved, we closed the door, and instead came out on the ground floor in a place no one had ever seen before. Turning around, we noticed that the door we had just left was completely innocuous. It had a lock at the bottom, and any unknowing passerby would have simply passed it off as a supply closet. We hurriedly walked through the double doors that led inside of the building, and discovered that we had gone through the exit doors on the 1st level that were previously mentioned. Confused and ready to be done with the building forever, we ran back to where we met with our teacher before we got onto the bus as soon as we could. The following are some things that I did not notice or experience personally, but heard about from other groups who ventured out together. One of the doors marked "Genderless Bathroom" led to a white carpeted room containing only a wooden table with a massive pile of clothing. There was a room in the back that was blocked off by a swarm of men in suits and people with walkie-talkies. One group had to run down to the 1st level because they reached the same massive storage room I had come across and were spotted by a security guard who began to walk briskly toward them. In order to actually reach the roof, one had to go through a bathroom into a hallway with a ladder at the end. One kid was separated from his group and somehow ended up in a narrow, dimly lit stairwell, and he wasn't willing to walk in. There wasn't a single security camera anywhere in the building. Maybe this sounds considerably less threatening when it's related back to you, but this building seeped unease like a wet sponge. I was terrified, but I was so immensely curious, and the further we went into the building, the more surreal it got. I'm not entirely sure I even believe what happened, but I know I want to go back and find out more. 3. I learned how to swim when I was 5 years old. The neighbor to my grandma had a very large old-school underground pool, with a shallow end that was 3 feet and a deep end that was 15 feet. There was a diving board and water slide in the deeper part of the rectangle pool. We were great friends with the couple next door, and they let us use the pool whenever. My grandma taught me how to swim. I had been swimming like a champ in this pool for years. Nearly drowned a few times learning, but I had conquered this pool. I was about 11 when this happened. I was jumping off the diving board to the deepest part of the pool. I would go all the way down, then do flips underwater before I got to the surface. Every time I hit the surface, I would get out, jump back off the diving board, try to do one more flip, and hold my breath a little longer. Grandma trusted me to be in the pool alone and came back to check on me periodically. I got to the end of my rope with the flips. I got to the point I maxed out on all my flips. But I was so dead set on beating my score and doing at least one more. I did it, but my lungs were literally empty. They were like shriveled little grapes. I knew I was cutting it close, but now I was worried of actually dying. I was still 4 or 5 feet underwater, and I was frantically swimming to the surface. I was about a foot from the surface when, against my will, I gasped for air. But I got it. My body took in a sharp breath, and even young me was like, "What the fuck, wait a minute." I hovered in the water, staring at the surface, and just took little breaths. I was afraid if I took a big breath, whatever was happening would stop. So after a few minutes of taking small breaths, I decided why not take a big breath. If I took it and swallowed water, I was close enough to the surface to just pop up and cough it out. So I took a big, deep breath, and it was all air I got. Now little me is like, holy shit, this is awesome. Around this time, it had been about 15 minutes since Grandma last checked on me, and came by to see if I was okay. I popped up out of the water and told her I was fine. She then returned to talk to the neighbors. I immediately sunk my nose in the water and took small breaths again, then swam to the shallow end. I wasn't sure how deep this new ability would go. I mean, I was almost to the surface when it kicked in. I didn't want to press my luck in the deep end and actually drown. So I went to the shallow side and slowly descended until my belly was on the floor of the shallow end. I was fine. Every breath I took was received with no issue. One, there were no bubbles. I don't know where this air is coming from, but when I exhaled there were no bubbles. I also breathed through my nose 95% of the time. Large breaths felt weird the deeper I got, so I would inhale through my mouth at that point. The pressure being in the deeper parts of the pool made me feel strained to take large breaths through my nose. 2, when I was breathing there was no water going in or out of my nose or mouth. I wasn't drinking water and converting it to air. There was no water that got in my mouth or nose when I went to breathe. However, I was 100% surrounded by water. My lips were wet when they opened, but no water rushed in. 3. I could still feel the pressure and weight of the water the deeper I went. There seemed to be slightly more pressure than normal holding your breath. The deeper I went, it felt like there was a fat toddler sitting on my chest. I was fine otherwise. 4. There was no limit to how long I could be under. It never faded. It was just a constant. After I felt I was safe in the shallow end, I descended to the deep end. I ended up in the deepest part of the pool. I could feel the extra pressure. It made my ears pop, but I was doing fine. I remember thinking this was so unreal. I knew this wasn't normal, but couldn't explain it. I didn't know if it would happen again, so I took advantage of it. Grandma came to check on me a few more times, but I just put my hand out of the water with a thumbs up. I was under for about 45 minutes without coming up. Grandma started to get nervous because she stopped hearing splashing and felt I was under too long. So I told her I was fine and that she didn't have to check on me so often. She was happy I was okay, and I went back under and continued for a few more hours until we went home. A week or 2 had passed, and my little brother came with me to Grandma's to swim at the pool. He is 3.5 years younger. We went to the pool and I was curious if I could breathe underwater again. So I put my nose underwater and tried. Surprised I could do it. I wasn't sure if I was being saved by a divine force the first time. Clearly the second time it was purely for shits and grins, but I swear 100% I was able to breathe underwater for a second time. No issues, same observations as before. My brother was there with me this time and watched me. I came up when Grandma checked in but stayed under the rest of the time. We still talk about it. I am 27 now and he is almost 24. Grandma even remembers me being under for long periods of time and getting nervous. However, my brother and I were kids and just thought it was cool. I did try this a third time and it didn't work. I wasn't surprised, just disappointed. I mean, I was lucky to have done it a second time. I know there are going to be tons of people saying it's fake. This is the internet and people post fake stories all the time. But honest to God, this story is 100% true. The only reason I posted it is because I want to know if others have had something like this happen. Also, my grandmother is wonderful and awesome. She did a great job with all of us kids, 5 kids. I was just the oldest kid that was constantly overly independent and confident in my abilities. I don't want people to bash her for not being there all the time. It's how I liked it, and she respected that. Plus, she had my 3 younger cousins and brother to chase a lot of times. But this event, among a few others that were just seemingly unexplainable in my childhood, made me a believer that shit happens that we can't explain, and not everything crazy you hear is bullshit. Disclaimer, I was never on medication as a kid, and am not on medication now. I am 100% sane. Despite things like this happening, I am not religious at all. But I am curious how often shit like this happens, and no one talks about it because they don't want to be persecuted or judged. 4. Some backstory for context. When I was 19, I broke up with my first boyfriend, who we'll call L. We had been living together for about a year and he was becoming more and more controlling. It started off subtle, but by the 9-month mark, I was getting passive-aggressive texts and phone calls anytime a grocery store trip took 5 minutes too long. I called it quits, and he started accusing me of sleeping with his best friend, who was also a girl. His reaction to the breakup was to throw a steel-toed boot at my head. It missed, thankfully, but it left a dent in the wall. So last month, I went through my nightly routine like always, making sure to set my alarm for work the next day and went to bed. I woke up to Elle kissing my cheek and asking me how I slept. It was one of those, this is so weird it has to be a dream moments, and I just lay there for a second waiting to wake up. When I didn't answer, Elle sighed and started getting dressed. Elle started ranting about how he'd already said sorry and how unfair it was for me to hold a grudge and so on. Not having heard one of his meltdowns in years, I just walked out of the room, wanting to wake up in my own bed. He followed me, calling me terrible names and saying he was never going to marry me if I didn't get my act together. I actually laughed at that and said I'm so glad we broke up. The look of shocked confusion on his face was actually pretty satisfying. I packed a bag, got in my car and drove away, just like I did when I was 19. I ended up at my dad's, who seemed really surprised when I told him I broke up with Elle. The last thing I remember is laying down on his couch while my phone started ringing like crazy. The next thing I knew, I was back in my bed, at my apartment, with my alarm going off. At first I shrugged it off as a dream, but when I got into work everyone was asking me if I was feeling better. When I asked, they just kept saying I missed work yesterday and no one could get a hold of me. I shrugged it off as a prank until I saw the date. I really had missed a whole day. I went to the doctors after work, thinking I had just been sick the day before, but they couldn't find anything wrong with me. My co-workers and I assumed it was probably just stress and I slept more than a day as a bodily defense or something and moved on. At least, until just a few days ago. It was a Friday, so I stayed up a little later to finish the latest available season of a TV show I watch, and play some games on my computer to de-stress from the week. I went to bed around 2 a.m. and woke up in my old room at my dad's house. My phone was next to me, and there were about 30 texts from Elle, starting out sappy, then apologetic, then passive-aggressive, then just threatening. I looked through the back catalogue before answering and felt really sad. Messages sent from my phone started off apologizing and went to begging when Elle said nasty things. The sent messages stopped when he started threatening her. Me? Us? If I didn't threaten to move to the other side of the country with him. That's all I remember. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in my bed again on Sunday morning, having completely missed Saturday. I'll say I don't do drugs. I wasn't drunk, and neither I or my family have a history of mental illness. Is it possible that I crossed into another timeline where I never broke up with Elle? Is it possible that I saved another version of me from him too? 5. I've been wanting to share this anonymously on the internet for some time, to see if anyone else can identify with this. This isn't so much a physical glitch that happened to my reality right before my eyes, as much as a strange rush of inexplicable thought patterns and awareness that I would have when I was at an age too young to have them. I am a 40-year-old man now, and I've thought about this from time to time over the years, never really being able to properly explain it to trusted people whenever talk of strange experiences came up in conversations. Regardless, it still sort of creeps me out. To give some context, until I was 10, I grew up in an area where my family was surrounded by a lot of land and woods. I wouldn't say we were cut off from the world, but the neighbors' houses were like distant background scenery. Definitely too far to interact with them on a regular basis. Up to 10 years old, my only contact with the outside world was when my parents took me somewhere shopping, going to school, when I saw extended family on holidays. And of course, my immediate family. My family didn't have cable back then because it didn't reach our area yet. This was the 80s. The Fox network hadn't even come to my town at that point, and even NBC and the other big rabbit-ear networks would go off the air late at night until morning. Yes, I feel old. My entertainment consisted of very unsophisticated Saturday morning cartoons and sitcoms like Family Ties, etc., and pro wrestling. I think this is important to note because at the time, the movies and the TV available to the average rural kid didn't get into the deep rabbit hole quantum physics stuff that some of it does now. I came to find out later in life that comic books did, but an ordinary kid at 7 or 8 would have had a hard time understanding those comics if they happened to pick one up. And long, deep arcs over many issues were impossible to keep up with when the local drugstores and grocery marts only stocked them sporadically. So I didn't have the context or exposure to concepts that went beyond good guys stopping bad guys from robbing a bank, or taking over the world in some harebrained scheme. I was way too young for philosophy discussions in school or Carl Sagan books. I was just an elementary school kid learning basic subjects, and because of a learning disability that wasn't caught until I was in junior high, I was actually behind most of my peers academically. Back then, between the ages of 6 and 11, every once in a while, with seemingly no trigger and at completely random times, I would have these sudden feelings come over me. I don't even know if feelings is a good word to describe it. It was like a shift in thought and mental presence, in which I would look around at wherever I was and whoever was with me, and sort of have this understanding, as if it was pure, unquestioned fact, that there were other universes. We, meaning this universe, were only occupying one. In fact, there were 4 I would become aware of. I would even see these 4 universes, not manifesting in front of me or anything like that, but in my mind's eye. The best way I can describe it is this. Picture seeing a bird's eye view of a compass that's not labeled. On the tip of what we would consider the east arm was our universe, but there were other universes on the north, south, and west arms too. It wasn't like how parallel universes are speculated about now or portrayed in science fiction, where the other universes are realities in which you made a different decision and it affected your life. It was more like everything was different in them, with a different feel to the world in those universes and different people occupying them. There was no you or me in the universes, just people who it was physically impossible for us to ever meet. It was scary in those moments that this happened because I would know that the people in my universe around me at the moment, including the adults, didn't know about these other places. or the bigger picture I was seeing, and it made me feel alone. As if out of nowhere I was aware of something that made me even smaller. It was a haunting feeling too that I'm not sure how to describe. It was like the world around me became less real during those moments, turning into the unreal feel you have during dreams, except I wasn't asleep. What made it worse was that I didn't have the knowledge or understanding to describe it to anyone. I had never heard of the concept of parallel universes back then. I just called them to myself only the other worlds. I would think, isn't it weird that we live in this world and not the other ones? Since I didn't know how to convey it to anyone, I didn't bother to try. I just kept it to myself. The feelings would come and then they would pass. I wouldn't think about it again until the next time it happened. These moments of awareness were sort of like standing on the side of an empty country road and having a strange lone car that's driving at a constant speed come up that road, pass you, and drive on until it was out of sight. The quiet is broken by it, and you watch it go by, but continue whatever you were doing after it's gone. At 10, my parents split, and I lived with my mom in a more suburban surrounding. These feelings only happened a few times again after that. The last time I remember it happening was when I was 11 and my family that my mom was friends with were helping us set up a Christmas tree we had bought at a lot. It never happened again after that as far as I can recall. I've had a few other strange things happen in my life. Honestly, I think we all have. But these particularly inexplicable moments still stand out to me, and I have a hard time dismissing them to myself as mere moments of childhood imagination. I can still remember the haunting feeling of them when it happened, and it certainly doesn't make me feel nostalgic thinking of them. If anyone understands what I described and had these same experiences, I would love to hear about it. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 5 True Glitch in the Matrix Stories, episode 101. I always think of the Terminator when I hear that 101. There'll be another one of those out soon. But that's completely irrelevant. You know, there's something about a late night recording session. If you get yourself in the right mood, it's very, very satisfying. That's not a word. Satisfying. There we go. Much better. It's like, I could wait to do this to the next day, but do it now, there's no pressure. This is all extra bonus stuff, really. And the good thing is, if I do get these done early, I'll get done early tomorrow, and that means I can start work on the weekend videos, and I might get an extra day like I did last week. Do I have to do anything? Let me think. I could do with cleaning the house. Well, I've been kind of making a point of doing that on the weekends anyway. It's really easy to get lazy with that sort of thing, but I've been making an effort because, you know, I live here. It's nice if I keep the place clean for myself. Yep. That's about all I've got to do, I think. Unless I get paid before then. It's usually after the 21st, but there's no guarantee it'll, because it's close to Friday. It could be Monday by the time I get it. If I do, then there's a couple of things I do need to get, like new curtains and the like. And I'm going to shut up now because I'm boring even myself. Okay, and with that I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.